What if everything you believed about your life was a lie? What if the ring on a stranger's finger held the truth about who you really are? This isn't just a story about a broken-down car on a deserted road. It's about a forgotten promise, a stolen childhood, and a mechanic who carries a legacy too heavy for one hand. So she passed it to the world. In this story, a powerful executive finds himself stranded. But what he discovers is not just someone who can fix his engine, but someone who can break open his soul, stay until the end, because the twist, it's not just in the ring, it's in everything that ring represents. In this true-style cinematic story, a woman, erased by greed, fights for justice. A man raised in lies learns the truth about his blood, and a family lost in silence finds its voice again. Don't just watch. Feel it, live it, and let it change you. Now let's begin. It was supposed to be the most important day of his career. A day of suits, speeches, and signatures worth hundreds of millions. But fate had other plans, and they didn't involve air conditioning. Somewhere in the sweltering emptiness of rural Arizona, a Bentley Flying Spur rolled to a reluctant stop. No smoke, no warning, just silence. Thomas Calderon punched the steering wheel with a fury reserved for men who are used to controlling everything, except combustion engines. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked in mockery. 43 a.m. 17 minutes. That's all he had left to get to the SkyTech Summit, the place where he'd unveil the AI-powered future of Calderon Dynamics, a future that, ironically, didn't account for roadside failure. Thomas yanked the door open, stepping out into a furnace of asphalt and sun. His Italian loafers weren't made for this terrain. Neither was his $3,000 Brioni suit, now sticking uncomfortably to his skin. He popped the hood. Steam hissed out like a protest from the gods of irony. A CEO worth $200 million, reduced to waving heat away with a leather folder. The engine looked like an alien language, a mess of wires, metal, and betrayal. He sighed, and for a moment, just stood there, powerless. In the distance, a humming sound cut through the heat. Low, gritty, familiar. An old pickup truck crawled down the road like it belonged to another era. It stopped a few feet away. Thomas turned, and from the driver's side stepped out a woman. Not someone you'd expect on this forgotten stretch of highway. She wore grease-stained jeans, heavy boots, and a faded plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was pulled back in a thick bun. Curly strands escaped around her temples. Glistening with sweat, her skin, dark and sun-kissed, seemed to glow against the harsh light. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. She simply walked toward the open hood. "Engine trouble?" she asked, voice calm, eyes assessing. Thomas looked at her, then at his car, then back at her. "I have a meeting in 15 minutes, he said, irritation sharp like a paper cut. "My assistant was supposed to send help, but this place doesn't even have cell signal." She smirked slightly. Not cruelly, just knowingly. "Well, lucky for you," she said. "I don't need an app to know what's wrong with this engine." Before he could object, she leaned over the Bentley. Her hands moved fast, confident, like she belonged there, as if the cost of the car meant nothing. "It's the cooling system," she diagnosed, not even glancing at him. "Quick fix can buy you few hours, long enough to reach the city." Thomas stared at her. This woman didn't ask for permission, credentials, or validation. She just started fixing. "You sure?" he asked. She looked up, unfazed. "I'm a mechanic," she said, flatly. "Got a shop about 10 miles up the road. Name's Nia." And just like that, she returned to her truck, grabbed a toolbox, and got to work. Her movements were clean, efficient. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. Each twist of her wrench said, "I've done this before. I've done this under worse conditions." Thomas watched, arms folded. For the first time in a long while, he had no power here, no leverage, and something about that unsettled him. 5 minutes passed, maybe less. "Another 5, she muttered. "Any longer and your engine would have been toast." Then she added casually, "These cars, powerful but sensitive, like some people. Thomas raised an eyebrow, but didn't reply. He was too busy checking the time, wiping his brow, wondering if any of this was salvageable. And then he saw it. As she reached to tighten a bolt, sunlight caught on her left hand. A ring. Silver, old, with a small blue sapphire in the center. It didn't belong here. Not in a workshop. Not on those worn hands. Not on her. His breath caught. His heart. Just, for a second, forgot how to beat. He knew that ring. He had given that ring once. Lifetime ago, under a tree at Larkhill Orphanage, to a girl with tear-streaked cheeks and a promise on her lips. "I'll come back for you," he'd said. And he never did. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked, his voice trembling in a way that surprised even him. Nia paused, closed her hand almost protectively. "It was my mother's," she said without looking up. "Why do you ask?" Thomas didn't respond, because he already knew. That ring wasn't just metal and stone, it was memory. It was guilt. It was a question he thought he'd buried, until now. And suddenly, the car wasn't the only thing that needed fixing. Nia didn't flinch, not when he asked about the ring, not even when his voice broke a little. She just kept working, like she hadn't just triggered a memory buried 20 years deep. Thomas stood there, still, the heat forgotten, his eyes locked on the delicate silver band, a sapphire that once meant everything. "You said it was your mother's," he repeated, voice low. "Where did she get it?" Nia looked up then. Her gaze was calm, measured, but there was something underneath it, like a door behind her eyes that refused to open. "She had it for as long as I remember," she said. "Why does it matter?" Thomas swallowed. It shouldn't, but it did. Because that ring didn't come from her mother. It came from him, from a boy version of himself he barely remembered. A boy who made a promise and never looked back. "You remind me of someone," he said. Nia gave him a sideways glance. "Yeah?" Thomas nodded slowly. "A girl I knew a long time ago." There was a pause. Then Nia stood upright, wiping her hands on a grease-stained rag. "Larkhill Orphanage," she said flatly. Thomas froze. His mouth went dry. How do you know that name?" She folded the rag, tucked it into her back pocket. Then looked him dead in the eye. "Because I lived there." Silence, long, heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. "I was 7, she continued. "You were the rich kid who showed up for 2 months right before getting adopted." He nodded slowly, speechless. "I remember you," she added. "You gave me that ring under the sycamore tree behind the cafeteria." "I said I'd come back for you," Thomas murmured. She raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't bitter. It was worse. It was fact. And facts cut deeper than judgment. Thomas stepped back, ashamed in a way he hadn't expected. "I wanted to," he whispered. "My father, he had other plans." Nia shrugged. She'd heard that story before, from too many people who left and never returned. "I was moved out a week later," she said, "then bounced from home to home until Ezra found me." "Ezra? My uncle, by choice, not blood. Runs a body shop in town, took me in when no one else would." She gestured toward the distant hills. "That's where I learned this," she said, holding up her wrench. "Where I earned this," she added, nodding toward the ring. Thomas frowned. "I thought it was your mother's." "It is," she replied quietly, "but she never got to wear it." The air felt heavier now, like it knew something both of them didn't. Thomas glanced back at his car, now running smoothly, the engine's gentle purr a soft contrast to the storm inside him. "I owe you one," he said. She didn't answer. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a thick stack of bills. "Please," he added, "for your time, for everything." She took the money, but not the way he expected. There was no smile, no gratitude, just a calm, practiced motion, like she'd done this before, like being paid to help was routine. But something about it stung him, deep, because he didn't want this. To be transactional, not with her. As she turned back toward her truck, he blurted out, "What's your last name?" She stopped. Didn't turn, just answered, "Robinson. Nia Robinson." The name hit him like a quiet explosion. Not because it was familiar, but because it sounded right. Like something from a life he almost had. "Wait," he called. She turned slightly, one foot already in the truck. "What? Do you ever think about back then?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes." Thomas stepped closer. "I'm sorry I never came back." This time she smiled, but it wasn't a forgiving smile. It was the kind that said, "You're 20 years too late. If your car breaks down again," she said, sliding into the driver's seat. "Shop's 10 miles west, right after the Aurora Ridge sign." He watched her close the door, start the engine, drive off in a trail of dust, and just like that, she was gone. But the ring stayed burned into his mind, more powerful than any signature he'd deliver today, more haunting than any corporate scandal he'd faced. And as the Bentley glided back onto the road, Thomas Calderon knew something had shifted. Not in the car, not in the meeting, but in him. And some part of him whispered, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Thomas didn't sleep that night, not a single hour. He sat in his penthouse office, lights off, phone in hand, staring at her name on the screen. Nia Robinson. 2 words that shouldn't mean anything. But now, they meant everything. He opened a browser, typed slowly. Larkhill Orphanage records. Nothing. The place had been shut down years ago. Too many allegations, too many secrets buried under fresh paint and false names. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and suddenly he was 8 again, holding that ring, placing it in a little girl's hand under a tree whose leaves had long since withered. "You keep this," he'd whispered. "I'll be back for you." But he never did, because Richard Calderon had other plans, always did, always controlled everything. Thomas opened the old digital archives stored on the company's internal server, a place only executives could access. He searched for one word, Aurora. Within seconds, a project file appeared, Project Aurora Ridge, Phase 1 development estimated value, $1.4 billion status, cleared for construction. Location, former Robinson family land. His heart sank. He clicked the attached PDF land acquisition agreement. Signed. Sealed R. Calderon. The date Ian was 20 years ago, the same year he left the orphanage, the same year Nia vanished from his life. Coincidence? He didn't believe in those anymore. He kept reading. One line jumped out at him like a scream. Acquisition made under emergency provision. Landowner deceased. No heirs. But that wasn't true. He had seen her. He had spoken to her. Nia Robinson. Living. Breathing. An heir. And that meant the contract was a lie, a deliberate one. He closed the file with shaking fingers. His father had built an empire, but beneath the steel and glass was theft. He needed answers. Real ones. And there was only one place he'd get them. The next morning, Thomas drove himself. No chauffeur, no suit, just jeans, a jacket, and a look in his eyes that said, "Today, I'm not a CEO. I'm a man chasing the truth." He pulled up in front of a weathered garage with a rusted sign, Ezra's Auto and Rebuild inside. Nia stood hunched over an engine block covered in grease. She didn't look up when the bell chimed. "We're open," she called. He stepped closer, cleared his throat. "I'm not here for service." She froze, then turned. His face was softer than yesterday, but his eyes were heavy, tired, haunted. "I came to return something," he said. He held out his hand. In his palm was a tiny wooden carving, a bird, wings outstretched. Nia gasped. Her hand covered her mouth. "That's, you made it," he said gently. "Back at the orphanage, you gave it to me before I left." Her voice cracked. "I never thought you kept it." "I didn't," he said. "I carried it. every move, every city, every boardroom. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back now?" Thomas hesitated. Then, "Because I found something. Something you need to see." He pulled out a folder, laid it gently on the hood of the car. Nia opened it slowly. Inside, copies of land deeds, contracts, internal memos, stamped, dated, signed by Richard Calderon. Her face hardened. "I knew it," she whispered. "My mother wasn't dead." Thomas looked up. "What?" Nia walked over to a metal cabinet, opened a false back, and pulled out a dusty envelope. Inside were old letters, torn legal papers, and a worn photograph. "My mother's name was Amelia Robinson," she said. "She was forced into hiding when they took the land. She left this with my uncle Ezra to keep me safe." Thomas stared at the photo. A smiling woman with kind eyes, and on her finger, the same sapphire ring. "She didn't abandon me," Nia said. "She was erased." Thomas clenched his jaw. "Your land, your mother, your life, stolen by mine," she finished. A long silence followed. Then, her voice low, "I'm going to expose him at the groundbreaking next week." Thomas didn't move, didn't breathe. Hundreds of investors, cameras, his father, a legacy on the line. "You'll be risking everything," he said. She looked at him, not angry, just ready. "I've got nothing left to lose." That night, Thomas sat in his apartment staring at the city skyline. It glittered like success, like lies wrapped in gold. He held the wooden bird in his hand, turned it over, and finally whispered, "I'm with you, Nia, whatever it takes." The sun set behind the glass towers of Aurora Ridge. Camera crews were already in place. Dozens of luxury sedans lined the entrance to the new Calderon Dynamics campus. The air was thick with pride and pretense. Tonight wasn't just a ribbon cutting. It was a coronation. The night Richard Calderon would unveil the crown jewel of his empire, a multi-billion-dollar tech hub built on what used to be forgotten land, forgotten by everyone except Nia Robinson. She stood in the shadows, not wearing a dress, not wearing makeup, just denim, a worn jacket, and the ring, the same sapphire that started it all. Beside her stood Thomas, no longer in the role of heir, just a man finally choosing truth over legacy. "You sure about this?" he asked. She didn't look at him, just nodded. "This is my ground. I speak here." The master of ceremonies took the stage, introduced Richard Calderon like a man born from gold. The audience clapped. Investors, politicians, journalists. None of them knew what was coming. Not yet. Richard stepped up to the microphone, smile polished. "Tonight we don't just open a building," he began. "We open the future." Applause, flashbulbs, then movement, a figure approaching the stage, uninvited, unscripted. "Nia." Some in the crowd whispered, others frowned. Richard saw her, and for a brief second, his eyes betrayed panic. "Nia Robinson," she said into the second mic. "I used to live here, before this land had concrete, before your machines drowned the trees." Richard forced a smile. "I'm sorry, miss, this was my home." Her voice rang out, strong, clear. "And the woman you called deceased was my mother." A murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras turned, flashes fired. Nia reached into her coat, pulled out the documents. Land deeds, court filings, a death certificate, forged. "Richard Calderon lied," she said. "He faked my mother's death, stole our land, built this empire on a crime." Gasps now. Silence, all eyes on Richard. His voice cracked. "This is absurd. Security." Thomas stepped forward. "No one moves." He held up his phone. A recording. A voice, Richard's, saying, "She probably doesn't even remember you." "She's alive then," Thomas's voice replied. "You've kept her hidden for 20 years." The crowd erupted. Chaos. Richard tried to speak, but the damage was done. He turned, fleeing the stage. But Nia wasn't finished. "Where is she?" She shouted, "Where is Amelia Robinson?" The crowd fell quiet again. Then another voice behind them, a voice soft but undeniable. "I'm here." Nia turned, stumbled. A woman stepped out from the wings, older. Gray streaked through her curls, eyes identical to Nia's. It was her. Amelia. Alive. Real. Tears spilled from Nia's eyes before she could stop them. They ran into each other's arms. The ring between them, finally where it belonged. Later that night, in the quiet of the garage, Nia sat beside her mother. Thomas leaned against the doorframe. "You were right," he said. She nodded, but her voice was low. "Tired. This isn't over." Thomas walked over, placed something in front of her. A folder. "Then let's finish it." Inside were adoption records, medical files, all bearing one name, Thomas Calderon. Only, they weren't real. Thomas looked her in the eye. "My birth certificate was forged." "What?" "I'm not his son," he said quietly. "I was adopted, to replace the child he lost." Nia sat back, stunned. He smiled bitterly. "I guess I was never meant to inherit anything." She reached out, placed her hand over his. "You just reclaimed everything that matters." They looked at each other, and in that silence began to rebuild. Not an empire, but the truth. The elevator climbed to the top floor in silence. Each ding, each second, a countdown. Thomas stood still, his shoulders tense. Beside him, Nia held the file like a weapon, not of violence, but of truth. Behind them, Amelia. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steel. The door opened. Calderon's office. All glass and chrome and ego. Richard was waiting, alone, hands clasped behind his back, like a king expecting traitors. "So," he said, his voice cool, measured, "this is how you repay everything I've given you." Thomas didn't blink. "You didn't give me anything. I earned it, every piece." Richard circled the desk, his tone sharp. "You want to throw it away? For a girl from a garage? For a sob story and a ring?" Nia stepped forward. "This ring belonged to my mother. She's not a story. She's standing right here." Amelia met Richard's gaze, and for the first time in 20 years, he looked away. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked, but her spine stayed straight. "Why me? Why my land? Why my daughter?" Richard didn't answer, just walked to the bar, poured himself something dark and expensive. Then, because it was easy. The words dropped like stones. "You had no husband, no money, just a child. No one would believe you. No one did." Amelia's fists clenched. "I believed me." Richard sipped. "Truth doesn't matter unless it's loud." "Well," Thomas said, pulling out his phone, "it's about to get loud." He pressed play, the room filled with Richard's own voice, confessing, mocking, admitting everything. "You think this will ruin me?" he sneered. "I am Calderon Dynamics. Without me, the company collapses." Thomas stepped closer. "No, without lies, it collapses." Nia opened the file, held up a paper. It bore Richard's signature on an adoption certificate, not for Nia, for Thomas. Richard froze. His glass paused mid-air. "You knew?" he whispered. "I know everything," Thomas said. "You adopted me after your real son died, changed my name, built a life around a fake bloodline, because your ego couldn't bear the truth." Richard laughed, but it was hollow. "You were a good investment," he muttered. "Clean medical history, obedient." Thomas stared at him. "I'm not obedient anymore." Nia's voice cut in. "And I'm not silent anymore. Your empire ends tonight." Richard's eyes narrowed. He pressed a button on his desk. Security, but nothing happened. Thomas smiled. "Already disabled. Guess who owns your IT division now?" Richard looked between them, then at Amelia. "You brought this on yourself," he said. "You were supposed to disappear." Amelia stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "I did, for 2 decades. But the truth has a long memory." Behind her, the door opened. Elise entered. Richard's face turned pale. She held up a USB drive. "And now the press has that memory too." Richard staggered. You were part of this?" Elise nodded. "You tried to marry me to a lie. Don't do business in fiction. Then she turned to Nia. I believe you. Let's make sure everyone else does too. Outside, sirens wailed, getting closer. Richard backed away, his eyes darting for exits. There's still time, he said. I can offer you money, shares, land. Thomas shook his head. I don't want your land. I want your silence. And I want your absence. Nia stepped forward, looked him in the eyes. This ring belonged to a family you tried to erase. But we're still here, still standing. And now, you're the one disappearing. The elevator dinged again. This time it brought officers, badges, cuffs. One of them read Richard his rights. He didn't struggle, didn't speak, just stared at Thomas, at Nia, at the ring. Then they took him away. The office felt lighter but not quiet. The storm had passed, and what remained was truth, not just spoken, lived. 3 days passed, but it felt like 3 lifetimes. The news hit every major outlet. Billionaire Richard Calderone arrested in land fraud scandal. Adopted heir breaks silence. Orphan mechanic reclaims her family's land. Every headline carried fragments of their pain, but also something more: closure. In the quiet corner of a city library, Thomas stared at the document in front of him, a name change form. All it needed was his signature. He picked up the pen, paused, not out of doubt but out of honor, then wrote it slowly. Thomas Elijah Robinson. He exhaled, a breath he didn't know he'd been holding since childhood. That afternoon he walked into Ezra's garage. It looked the same, smelled the same, but something had shifted. Nia was at the back, tightening bolts on a lifted pickup, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled, same grease-stained hands, same fire in her eyes. He waited until she looked up, then held out the form. She read it and smiled. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The name suits. You, she said. It's mine now, he replied. She wiped her hands, came closer. You're not your father. I know, he said, but I needed to prove it to myself too. He looked around the garage, the tools, the cars, the photos on the wall, and one frame stood out. A younger Amelia Ezra, and a tiny girl with big, curious eyes. I want to help, he said, with this place, with what it could be. Nia folded her arms, skeptical. You're still a CEO at heart, huh? No, he said, but I know what power can do when it's honest. They reopened the shop under a new name, Robinson & Sons Auto and Tech. Yes, sons. Because family isn't always about biology, it's about repair, of engines, of trust, of self. Nia ran the garage. Thomas handled operations. Amelia hosted weekly community workshops for young women. And every Friday, they served lemonade in the lobby, a ritual born from Amelia's quiet joy. She said it reminded her of home, not the building, but the feeling. One evening, Thomas sat on the back steps, the sun dipping behind the trees, the air warm, soft. He held the wooden bird Nia had carved years ago. It hung from a cord around his neck now, not for style, but as a compass. Reminder. Nia joined him, 2 bottles of soda in hand. She handed him one, sat beside him. Comfortable silence. Then she asked, "Is it strange?" "What?" "To find out your whole life was built on a lie." He looked up at the sky, then back at her. "Strange, yeah, but also freeing." She nodded, touched the ring on her finger. The sapphire gleamed. "It always brought us back," she said. He smiled. "You think that was destiny?" She shrugged. "I think some truths wait patiently until we're ready to carry them." The next morning, mail arrived. An official envelope. Thomas opened it. Inside, documents finalizing the land restoration. The Robinson estate, fully returned, along with a certified copy of Amelia's nullified death certificate. She stood at the counter, tears in her eyes. "It's real now," she whispered. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "It always was." She smiled through tears. Now the world finally knows. That evening, Thomas updated the company website. The new banner read, "We don't just rebuild engines, we rebuild stories." Underneath, a video of local kids learning to weld from Naya, another of Amelia laughing as she taught them to cook simple meals, and at the bottom, a quote from Naya. "Sometimes the loudest power isn't money or noise, it's truth, whispered, lived, shared." And as the sky turned orange over Aurora Ridge, 3 people stood in a place once stolen, now reclaimed. Not for profit, but for peace, a ring, a name, a reckoning now behind them, and a new legacy just beginning. The wind that morning was gentle, the kind that didn't rush, like the world itself had taken a breath, and finally exhaled. Nia stood at the edge of the property, no longer a site, no longer a battlefield, but home. Behind her, a new wooden sign stood tall. Olive Grove Center, a place to begin again. Funded by restitution, built with resolve, meant for families who'd lost everything but hadn't lost hope. Amelia stood beside her. She wore white, simple, elegant, her hands once bound by silence now free to bless the ground beneath her feet. She reached down, planted a sapling, an olive tree like the ones that once covered this land. "Let it grow," she whispered, for those who couldn't. Inside the new center, kids ran through the halls, laughter bouncing off fresh painted walls. Thomas walked among them, a quiet smile on his face. He wasn't the man from the billboard anymore, not the executive in the polished suit. He was something rarer, something truer, a man who'd let go of a name. To find himself, he entered the workshop. Nia was showing a teenager how to rebuild an engine. The kid's eyes sparkled. His hands trembled, but Nia steadied them. "Don't force it," she said. "Let it move how it wants to." She looked up. Saw Thomas watching. She smiled. And in that look there was no regret, only quiet understanding. That night they sat outside. No noise, just stars, and a ring that glinted under the moonlight. Naya turned it slowly, like she always did when she was thinking. "This ring," she said, "was never about promises." Thomas leaned back, listening. "It was a reminder," she continued, "that even when the world forgets you, something still remembers." He nodded, touched the wooden bird around his neck. "I used to think I came from nothing," he said, "but maybe nothing is just where something true gets built." They sat in silence, letting it say what words couldn't. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The noise quieted. But the legacy remained. One built not on power, but on people. On forgiveness. On truth whispered long enough to become echo, then voice, then action. In the lobby of the center, beneath the main staircase, hung a glass case. Inside it, 2 things: a silver ring with a blue sapphire, and a wooden bird with open wings. Above them, graved in bronze, a message: "You don't need to inherit a legacy. You can build one with your hands." And if someone told you that a broken-down Bentley on a dusty road in Arizona could lead to all of this, you wouldn't believe them, but Naya would, and Thomas would, and maybe now you do too. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love, because sometimes the smallest ring carries the loudest truth. Thank you for watching. They thought a legacy was built with money, but it was rebuilt with courage, with forgiveness, with a ring that refused to be forgotten. This story wasn't about engines or empires. It was about truth and how it waits patiently until we're brave enough to face it. So if this story stirred something in you, if it made your heart ache or reminded you of someone you've lost, or someone you still need to find, then maybe it's time to write your own ending. Or a new beginning, because what we inherit isn't just land or last names. It's pain, resilience, and the chance to do better. And sometimes, healing starts, not with a revolution, but with a ring, passed from mother to son, to sister, to the world. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, share, and most of all, comment below. What's your ring? What story are you ready to reclaim? Thank you for being here. Now go and build something real.